Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista here, and today I wanted to make a Valentine's card out of watercolor hearts. I still don't feel like I can draw, so I'm going to use this stamp. It's by Simon Says stamp. It's a cling stamp, heart to heart background. I'm using watercolor paper today, and just to transfer the image, I'm going to use some Distress Oxide in antique linen. The image didn't fully transfer over, so I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that up a couple more times. Before I start watercolor painting, I want to heat set this. I find that the Distress Oxide inks take a longer time to dry on watercolor cardstock as opposed to regular cardstock. I don't know the science behind it, but I want to make sure that it's dry. One, because I don't want to move a lot of the Distress ink when I'm watercoloring, and also I don't want to smudge it on accident while I'm painting. All of these watercolor paints that I'm using today are by Holbein. I'll start with some violet PN 582. I didn't dampen the watercolor paper before I started painting because I really wanted to control the blend. I'm starting with as thick of consistency as possible on the top and then just pulling it down towards the bottom of the heart. And when I pull that paint down, I'm starting with a clean, damp brush. Sometimes I clean it right off before pulling it down, and other times, like I did in this one, I'm just going to dampen it and pull it down towards the tip. You don't have to start with a thick consistency at the top of the hearts. You can also start with a thick consistency at one side and pull it over, or you can start with a thick consistency at the center and pull it out. It's completely up to you. Just to control the blending a little bit more, because there's so many hearts, I don't want it to get messy. I'm going to dry each heart in between because there are so many and they overlap quite a bit. But also, I'm trying to make sure that each of the colors aren't overlapping as much as possible. I try to keep different colors with different colors, like I'm not putting violet on violet. Coming in next with Carmen by Holbein. This is PN 502. Moving on to some Magenta by Holbein. This is PN 583. And out of the red hues that I received in my pack, this is probably my favorite. So I did happen to load quite a bit of paint onto my brush and I don't want to waste it. So before I dry this heart, I'm going to paint the next heart that I want magenta. To add variation in the hearts, I'm changing not only the color, but I'm also changing the consistency in which I paint them. Sometimes I paint them thick at the top and pull it down to a medium to a light consistency at the tip of the heart. Sometimes I use a thick consistency throughout the entire heart. The other thing that I like about using antique linen for stamping is that it works well with these colors after I paint over them. I can still see the outline of the heart, but it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. The antique linen will move a little bit as I watercolor paint because it's still a water reactive pigment ink, but when it's dry, it doesn't move as much as it would when it was wet. And any time that I felt like I had excess paint, like I accidentally picked up too much on my brush, I either went over a heart of the same color or I started the next heart that I wanted in that color. The final color that I'm using today is Opera by Holbein, and it's PN 503. You can also let each heart dry on its own, but I chose to use the heat tool just because it was a rather lengthy process as it was. The one thing that you do want to be careful of is the more water that you add to your paper, the more blended the hearts will become, and seeing as there's so many stacked one on top of each other in various places, they can tend to become muddy and kind of blurred of where the edges are. And that's why I chose to use less water, but also use the heat tool to keep those hearts fairly well defined. Another option to keep the hearts well defined is when you stamp it, you can add an embossing powder just to keep that outline. But I wasn't looking for a harsh outline today. I wanted something subtle. I'll go ahead and finish the rest of that background off camera, and while that dries, I want to die cut some elements to add to my card front. And out of gold cardstock, I will cut Happy Valentine's Day using Simon Says Stamp Big Valentine's Day wafer die. And both of these hearts come from the same pack. It's Lawn Fawn Outside In Stitched Heart Stackables. I chose to do the larger one in foil purple cardstock and the smaller one in red foil cardstock. And I'll just go ahead and run those through the die cut machine. And now that the background is completely dry, I don't need all of it for this card. So I want to cut down a 5 1/4 by 4 rectangle using Lawn Fawn Outside In Stitched Rectangle Stackables die. And that's the area that I chose to be my card front. I wanted the hearts to have a little bit more of a shimmer. So I'm coming in with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen in glitter gloss, and I really like to squeeze my pen off of my card front or off of my project, just because I find that sometimes it does tend to come out in a great big glob. And if it globs on the glass mat, it's okay, I can always just pick it up with my brush, but if it globs where I don't want it on my card front, I just spent all that time working on my project, I don't want it to be ruined potentially by a big glob of glitter gloss. And I find that I have these issues more often when I start a new pen as opposed to one that I'd been using for a while, and this is a relatively new pen. And since this is watercolor, the brush will pick up some of the paint occasionally, and when there are multiple colors in one area, it does tend to move them a little bit, but I just keep a clean cloth handy for when my brush does get colored. I can just wipe it off quick and keep going. I do find though that this glitter pen doesn't move the color as much as say a Perfect Pearl mixture with water. I really like this pen for watercolor projects. And I'm just picking some hearts at random. I don't have any method to my madness, and once I've glittered my hearts, I just want to set that with a heat tool just so that I don't accidentally smear it or smudge it after I put all this work into my project. I took the time to kind of lay out where I wanted everything, but to glue them down, I'm starting with Day. And to find center, I'll line my card up so that the center line hits the bold line on the glass mat, and then aim to have the A from Day line up with that line as well. I'll use my T ruler just as a double check to make sure that the word is straight. And I found that Day was the easiest to find center because it was only 3 letters. And once I found the placement of Day, Happy, and Valentines was easy to line up and find the placement for. Again, just to verify, I'll bring in my T ruler just to make sure that everything is straight. Next, I adhere the hearts with some liquid adhesive. And before I forget, I'll finish off the sentiment with those little details of the apostrophe in Valentine's Day and the little dot above the I. I wanted my card front to be on a little mat, so using the largest rectangle from Lawn Fawn Large Stitched Rectangle Stackables die, I cut in a 5 1/2 by 4 1/4 rectangle. If you want, you can also use a smaller rectangle inside to create a frame. The mat was adhered to the card front using liquid adhesive. And all that's left to do is add our card front to a card base. And I chose today a 5.5 by 4.25 folding note card. I want to thank you for watching to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.